Hey, this is wrong. KC0QVT. Dave, K4VSP.
KB4VSP.
Huh?
KB4.
Okay, sorry. KB4VSP came all the way from Holt Summit, Missouri. Pick up a repeater. Got to we're going to visit with him and hang out, and as we build him up a repeater. So anyway, yeah, all the way up from Holt Summit, Missouri. So anyway, it's good to know you, man. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You guys are top notch. I called Dan Thursday. Today is Friday. I explained to him that what I needed and what I wanted to do, and they were kind enough to stop their operation to take this as a priority. So
It's awesome.
Ron went way out of his way, and the whole staff.
Yeah, so we're gonna do, while we build up his repeater and get him going, we're gonna just interview him, find out where Dave came from and where he came from. And also how he became a ham and why he's into digital. So anyway, yeah, enjoy. You're into ham radio, and you got into it when you were a younger guy. Was it just because you were like into electronics? I mean, because you said
I was always fascinated by radio. When I was a kid, here I go with my age.
That's all right.
We didn't have FM. It was AM back in the day when I was raised. So AM, what was on AM? Shortwave. I had an old Hollycrafters that somebody had, and I bought it. It was an SX99, and I also had a 100, and I actually modified it to make a BFO so that I could listen to the sideband. So we used to listen to shortwave,
Well, how old were you when this was going
on? Probably early teens, maybe.
Yeah. This is when you were living in New York?
Yes. And so...
Were you a licensed ham at that point?
Well, again, like I said, we had a church group, and one of our leaders was a ham radio operator, W2DQL.
Yeah.
Don Cronemeyer, he worked for IBM. He was a physicist,
Yeah.
And so he held classes downstairs in the church. And back in those days, commercial equipment was very, very limited. He was, of course, he had Collins gear, which was like top of the line back in those days, And so Heathkit was the only one that was really making anything in the amateur market commercially. He had Allied and stuff like that, some of the older stuff. So I took my my novice license test down in Warwick Street in the FCC, because back in those days you went down there and you had to demonstrate both sending and receive, and take a written test. And back in those days it wasn't multiple choice. It was they would say, okay, make a schematic for an oscillator, and
wow.
You had to know exactly what was required to do that. They would say something like, okay, draw a resistor, draw an NPN transistor, those kind of things. And that's the way it was done. Of course, over the years it evolved to multiple choice and other things. So I took my extra, and at that time it was required to have 20 words a minute for extra. I was actually at 35 words a minute for proficiency at that time, which,
So did you get into DXing?
Oh, I was very big into the HF. Now, what really kind of triggered my interest was back in the late 70s, the digital modes were starting to appear. Packet, RTTY, those kind of things. Well, IBM wasn't making a personal computer for the home market. So, guess what I was using for a computer? A Commodore 64 and a 128. With a big old I think it was a 5.5 floppy drive.
Yeah, this is mid '80s.
We're talking back in those days. That was high tech stuff.
That was when I was a little kid.
So I was doing RTTY. I was I had a matter of fact, I still have my modems. I've got my MFJs, my cams, and so anyway, so I got into Packet. Well, Packet was at that time was in infancy. Things, people were like trying. So back in those days, I don't know if you've ever operated Packet or not, but back in the first early part of the days of Packet, you had to use a digipeater to jump from 1, 2, 3 to get long distance. Well, we were jumping probably 50, 100 digipeaters all the way down to the, down the East Coast down to Virginia. And then HF was the big thing. You know, you set your modem up to your HF, and you could take your packet traffic and your BBS, because BBSs were basically mailboxes, sender, storage, receive. Well, FBB and WA7 or whatever, there was multi-row server, all those things, were in the packet. So we put up a network. A few buddies and I set up this HF gateway to where we could send our BBS traffic, instead of having to go through all the relay systems to get to where it needed to go. We can go from gateway to gateway for long distances. For instance, from New York, if I needed traffic to go to Virginia, to a BBS located in Virginia, I would just pass it through my HF gateway and send it down to an HF gateway in Virginia, and then they could do it locally from there.
And this is over RF, not through a phone line.
This was RF. RF through HF.
I had no idea that. We used to do a lot of BBS.
Yeah.
Where you dial up use
your
modem with your computer and dial up.
Well, it's basically the same thing, but using RF.
That's incredible. I
And
missed that point.
So that became a real big thing back in the day. Then the net came out, and Rose server. That's where you had the packet repeaters, that's basically what we call them, and they would be at a central point. And so you would connect to it, and then it was a smart thing. It would have all the nodes that would come up that you could connect to and automatically send it and route it. I had 440 as a backup, and 220 was actually the backbone back in the day for packet. You go in on VHF and use 220 on 9600 baud, which was big time speed back in those days. Mm-hmm. And that would backbone all that stuff, and we'd have like all these nodes that be connected all over the country. And if they were going through the HF gateways, we had gateways for nodes for that too, that we can go worldwide with this thing. So you could actually have a packet, terminal to terminal communication, or send packet emails and those kind of things. So it got pretty elite. So packet kind of subsided, and so, but it's coming back. A lot of your EOCs are actually using that as their information database. Like, say, for instance, you have a laptop and you're stationed at, let's say, a hospital.
Yes.
And you need to communicate, casualties or whatever it is. You could send that information via the terminal to somebody else, maybe at the EOC or wherever it's needed, and they can keep tabs of stuff like that.
Is this what's called FL Digi?
Yes, it's FL Digi was kind of it's that's what they're using now.
Yeah.
But it's really based upon, when you go back to it, it's really based upon the old packet link.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, when you were a younger guy and got into this, you were dabbling with digital in a way. You talk about these.
I've been experimenting with all.
So it seems like a natural thing for you to do, almost to gravitate into DMR, because it's digital,
right, and
it kind of just fits where you've been moving all this while in your ham radio experience.
Well, you have to have an open mind with amateur radio.
Yeah.
And even when I was a kid, seeing it, vacuum tubes, because that's what it was. Transistors were just starting to come around back in those days. So, we had to build our own gear. I built my first ham gear from Heathkit. I bought the kit. I had HW101s, the SB102s, the 303, the 404 combination. They were really, back in the day, Heathkit was a real nice set line of equipment.
Well, I restored an old Tempo 1 Henry.
Tempo 1, I've had those too.
Yeah, those are awesome.
I had a Tempo 1, I had I had 101s E, double E, and triple E's. I still have my Yaesu FT757, the very first one that came out, and that came out in 1982, I believe. And I have that in its original box.
So, I'm just curious, when you got into DMR, what did you find to be the biggest challenge? Or are you still...
And initially, with the different type radios, the programming part of it it can be a challenge until you get to know the software and the particular radios. As far as the operation was concerned, I pretty much was pretty much pretty straightforward. Once you knew exactly who you wanted to talk to, what you know.
So where did you learn to? I mean, were you just online?
I
just
did a
looking?
lot. I did a lot of research.
Yeah.
I looked at your initial website. I
Uh-huh.
looked at you know, others, you know, people that were doing DMR and stuff like that. So I basically self-taught, I guess.